Hello, everybody. This is Tom from 6 Foot Networks, and I'm today going to talk about a basic server installation for CentOS Linux, and we're going to do CentOS 8. We're going to download the latest version, we're going to install it, and talk a little bit about what it takes and how I do it. So, since I need a newer version anyway, I figured I'd take you guys along for the ride. Here we go. First things first, we have to download the new version of CentOS 8. Go to the CentOS project. We're going to get a distribution of this, so I'm guessing we're going to do this one. We're going to pick one that's relatively close to us. We're in Los Angeles, so we can do probably... We'll go here to the LAX layer host repository for this, and we're just going to download the ISO for, I think this is just the bootable. Let's do the whole DVD. It's probably going to take a little bit longer, but we can always fast forward to the end of this. And I'm also doing this over Wi-Fi, which doesn't help. So I'll speed up this download through the magic of editing. Okay, so we're down to the last 30 seconds of this download. So I'll just get some of my thoughts out here. The reason why I could have downloaded the 64, the x86 64 boot ISO, which gives you enough to boot the system off of, but then you have to download all the packages that come with it when you're doing the installation. So I guess it's a toss-up, 6 to 1, half dozen to the other. Whether you want to download a smaller version just to get your system going or just download everything. I typically get the full DVD size version. You can see that it's roughly 9.26 gigs, and it's that little arrow right there indicates that it's trying to write it to my iCloud drive, which is fine. It doesn't matter. But the thought here is that if you have everything, you can actually burn a DVD and then take it into a lab or onto a physical server, and then you don't have to worry about dealing with the internet, because this build is going to have all the latest packages as of the date that this was created, whereas the boot one isn't going to have much of everything except for the system, and then you have to essentially connect the system to the internet before you can download all the packages. So take the time. It didn't take long, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, whatever. I did it over Wi-Fi here in our office, which, it's still time. I mean, you can easily walk away and get a cup of coffee or whatever, come back, take a break, come back, and it's done. So you can see that I have CentOS 7, and I usually create 3 virtual machines from the same server. So that way I can have a base server with the base installation, then I duplicate that, maybe do one for network services, see how it works, and then an overall test server that I can install other software and services to, just to make sure they work. And I just duplicate the base server and create all these instances of it. It does take up space, but you always have a starting point, a clean starting point, so that way you don't have to do this every time. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to file new, pick from, install from disk or image. And essentially you can also do this. So what I did was I just dragged and dropped it into the window. It already parsed the OS, that it's CentOS 8 64-bit, and then we just continue. I do not use easy install, not for servers, really not for anything, just because I have never really gotten this to work quite right, and then I still have to log in as a admin and create the accounts anyway, so it doesn't matter. So continue. Specify the boot firmware. Legacy BIOS is fine for this. I have no intention of doing any secure boot for this or any of the enhanced boot options. it kind of figures out here in this next window, what your guest operating system is, hard disk capacity 20 gigs. I always feel like these virtual machines go by very conservative values. So what I actually do is I customize settings, and then it allows me also to pick a spot where to put them to. So this is CentOS Linux. So I'm going to put it right here on the base. I'm actually going to add base server to this. If I can type correctly, you can see there's the other ones that are actually visible. These three here are actually visible here. I try to maintain the same file structure here as I do inside the interface, so that way I know that, based on wherever these are, I can find them on my system very easily. Like I said, this takes up a lot of space, but you can see I have a 2 terabyte drive in this Mac, and I have just under 1.5 terabytes free. So I try to make these the smart way. Like, I don't assign 500 gigs of disk space to any one of these servers. However, what I do is I do a minimum of 80 gigs, and for Windows I do a minimum of 160 gigs, just because of patches over time and other things that I might install to it. They just take up space. So let's go through this wizard here. So this is CentOS 8 64-bit base server. Save that. And then what I'm going to do is customize the settings. And then I go through these just a little bit. Here's the name, here's the OS. Total size currently is that. No snapshots and nothing reclaimable. So what I'm going to do is go back to show all, and I'm going to set all this up. No shared folders, we don't need them. I usually, increase this because newer laptops have some good beef to them. Usually 6 core is the best way, because anything greater than 6, you'll start getting, this error message: the virtual machine is configured to use too many of the processing cores available on your Mac. Slow performance on your Mac. If you need 8 cores, you need 8 cores. For testing, 6 cores is plenty. RAM, this machine has 32 gigs of RAM on it. So I usually give all my virtual machines 8 gigs of RAM. So 8192. And then you can still see that there's plenty remaining for Mac OS and whatever else is running on this computer. As far as advanced options go, I don't mess with this, mainly because for testing, I just don't need it. I don't need any performance increases or anything. This is plenty fast for what I do with it, just to get it going. As far as display goes, we can accelerate 3D graphics, full resolution for display. I don't really mess with this either. I like my window to come up like this, and then if worse comes to worse, I can always scale it. The guest operating system will resize inside. As far as CentOS server goes, I never install the graphical interface for server OSs. So this is just going to be command line based. There's nothing else about it that I need graphical interfaces for. Usually what I do with these test environments is I'll run it, like I'll hit this giant play button, the server will boot, and then I minimize it. And then it runs down here in the dock. A network adapter, I typically will either auto detect or I will just share it with my Mac, so that way it'll do NAT. Here's the virtual disk. Here's where you specify disk size. So we're going to do 80 gigs here. And we're going to drop this down. We're going to do a SATA bus. Don't pre-allocate the disk. Let it grow over time. And then I split it into multiple files just because I run cloning utilities on this Mac. If a specific portion of this virtual machine goes bad, I can restore just that chunk of it. So splitting it to multiple files will prevent you from having to copy over 80 gigs, in this case, whatever 80 plus its overhead is, from a server or whatever, your backup. It just makes it a little bit easier. So I think this splits it into 2 gig files. So it'll give you like 40, 45 files, whatever. And it works out great. Time Machine loves it because then it's only backing up the files that changed 2 gigs at a time. So yeah. And you can also obviously scale this to whatever you want. You cannot go obviously over what your available disk space is, but 80 gigs should be good to go. And Here's the trick with this. You sort of have to plan this out. If you're not sure, go a little bit larger. Like if you know that you're going to be testing a lot of software on this, maybe a database that grows over time, you want to give it space. This is only going to be my base server that I'm going to use for patch testing and basic deployments. So I don't need a lot of space, but I'm still giving it plenty to breathe over the long-term duration of CentOS 8. And CentOS 7 lasted more than enough with 80 gigs. And at some point, I'll recycle CentOS 7. I'll keep the base server and I'll delete all the other ones because I have a few of them here. So like the network services will at some point go away, just like it did with CentOS 6. At some point, the support ends, and you don't really want to mess with unsupported software at that point. Go back here. We don't need an optical drive, but for the boot, you do need to specify where your image is. That's why it's connecting a virtual CD DVD drive, and it connects the ISO image. So there it is, and there's that. USB and Bluetooth. I usually uncheck the share Bluetooth devices with Linux because that's just one more thing that could go wrong if there's a driver that's not quite compatible. And I don't share any of my devices with the machine. I kind of try to keep things separate between environments. I also don't share my printers. In fact, remove the printer port. I never need to print from my servers. Camera, I'm gonna remove the camera because we don't need that. USB and Bluetooth, I keep that there instead of just removing it. Yeah, I can remove it from here, removing the USB controller. Like I said, this is just going to be a base server. It's really what you need it to be. So for me, I leave it. The sound card, remove the sound card. Startup disk, this is going to basically be a boot menu for the computer. We're going to use the CD DVD option. It'll restart on its own and find it. Encryption, I don't want to deal with encryption, not for testing. Once I start moving, critical data, any PCI compliant data or FIPS compliant data, then we will worry about encryption. Compatibility, well, the default's usually the best way to go for this. It tells you what the limits are of this version of VMware Fusion. There's no way I will, go over any of this. I mean, this computer doesn't have these limits, so the computer will max out beforehand. So we leave that the way it is. Isolation, I disable it for Linux because it's all command line based, unless I'm doing a graphical environment, which I very rarely do with Linux. And then advanced, I like to pass the power status to the VM, and the reason for that is if I'm running this environment on a laptop with battery and I'm full screening, because you can full screen this environment, right, with the little green button, the environment will actually report your battery status. So if you're starting to die, I've had it before where I was working on something full screen and all of a sudden the image just disappeared, and turns out the computer died, and I had all of these notification, from the notification centers here, all these notices that said, hey, dummy, plug your computer in. You have, 10%, 5%, 3%. And then finally it just said, well, I guess he's not going to plug it in. And the computer just, told me the easy way that it was dead. Now I pass the power status onto the VM so I can see any power related dialog messages in the operating environment if I'm in full screen mode. So good thing to have. Everything else I typically leave. Yeah. That's it. I close this once it's done, and then once you have all your settings, hit the play button. Oh, look at that. And it actually tells you side channel mitigations provide enhanced security but also lower performance. This is a test environment. I check the box and hit OK. And you can actually refer to this article right here for more information on what side channel mitigations actually do. So by default, they're enabled. You can disable them. I don't know if it'll make much difference for testing, really. Anyway, hit OK. This will now boot. Give it a sec. it'll start parsing that ISO. And there's the boot screen. I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can see it. If you just let it go, it'll automatically boot in a minute. I usually just click into the window, so you can see my mouse just disappeared, and I hit the letter I. You can see it just selected that, and I hit enter. And if you at any point need to get out of the window, you see I just moved my mouse out of it, and it got me into the Mac OS environment again. Oops. Let me minimize that so we're not seeing two of those. Oops. Let's grab the edge of this and make it bigger. So it starts the installer, and because this is the full install, this is the full DVD ISO image, it'll actually give you all the options to install going through this. So we can just click through it. Language English, US, continue. So here we can set Los Angeles. Let's go up a little bit because we're in Los Angeles. Network time can be turned on only if you're connected to the network. So you can see that we don't have that. So I will actually set this manually to our current time, which is 15:11. Today is January 4th, 2021. Done. Get it close. Once you get it on the network time will sync. Installation source, local media. Here's where you can pick your servers. So I want just a minimal install. Right here is where you could click like network servers. So if you're doing network servers or any of that, you can also do .NET stuff for Windows. Or you can just click the server and then you can pick your packages. So if you want to do a Windows file server, an FTP server, if you're doing InfiniBand stuff for clustering or grid connectivity, there it is. File and storage servers, it just depends on what you want to do. Mail servers, yeah, pretty much it. So we're going to do a minimal install just to make it quick, right? Hit done. This is where things get festive because we're going to pick our virtual disk. It tells us 80 gigs free. Good, check mark is there. I would like to automatically configure the storage, so I will just check that box, leave that, and then somewhere here is the done button. So it does its thing. You have to address everything that's red with a little triangle, so we did all that. Network connectivity, let's turn this on. It already got an IP address, so we can actually name this to whatever we want. So CentOS 8 VM server 01, and I'll give it the suffix for 6-foot networks. Hit apply. That's going to be the host name. It actually brings it up. We'll leave the IP addresses. This is just a virtual environment, so it's not the production network here, but it's fine. This will do network address translation with the Mac. So we hit done there. It'll show there that we have connectivity. Guess what we can do now? We can go back here. We can turn on network time and it'll actually stay on. Turning on network time will gray this out, which is fine. And then the last thing here for us, we're just going to do a root password. Our password's good. Yeah, it's not really secure, but it's fine for what I'm doing. And the passwords, I guess, matched. We can also create a user. So I'm just going to create one for myself. Make this an admin. Require a password. To my surprise, also good. Done. This is the place where I create user accounts. I don't do the user accounts in the VM, create a VM portion of it. All the required information has been input, right? Software install minimal, Los Angeles, local media. Disk is going to be partitioned. KDump is enabled by default. It's fine. That's just the logging for the installer and everything else. Network and host information, that's connected. Users are created, root password set, and my user account will be created as an administrator. Make sure that box is checked. You want to be an administrator. Otherwise, you're going to have a really tough time doing anything as a standard user, especially on a server. Begin. And this is going to take some time, so feel free to fast forward. Actually, I'll do one better for you. We'll do some movie magic here and get to the end of this. So I feel the need to point out here while this is installing, it does take a little bit of time to do even on a pretty quick computer, just because it's, it takes some effort to install the OS. It should after a certain point just fly across, but you can actually see what your system's doing up here. I don't know if you can tell in the video, but these things are actually blinking, meaning it's reading from the DVD, also known as this ISO image. And this is the hard drive of the virtual machine, so you can see it's reading data, putting it in to the drive, and as it's doing its thing, you can kind of watch it. If it stops, maybe there's a problem, or maybe there's a package issue or something. I find it very rare. You just have to be patient, and this will keep going. So like I said, it takes some time, so be patient, and this would be probably a good time to take lunch. And you can see that it got past the kernel thing. It's now configuring microcode. So we'll let this keep going, and we'll speed it up again for you guys. Alright, so here we are getting to the end. It actually zipped along quite nicely. You can tell by the clock in the top right hand corner of this computer right here how long it exactly took. Get an idea as to how long it takes to do this. Typically, I set aside an hour to do a brand new install. For now, you can see here, CentOS Linux is now successfully installed and ready for, God, I wish it would fit. But go ahead and reboot the system. So I'll reboot. And then if you need to get your mouse, by the way, out of this window, you can actually hit the control and command keys and it will actually bring your mouse out of the environment. So you can see it there. So this will now boot. And what's great about it is it boots directly to the drive. You can see here it's not trying to boot to this DVD anymore. And look how fast it booted. It's already at the login window. Or at the login dialog, login window. There goes the Mac part of me. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to log in as the user that I created. I try to avoid root where possible because you can really foul things up with root, and so we're just going to do it like this. Alright, we're logged in. Now the first thing I do is I'll make sure that I have some kind of IP address, and sure enough I do have the IP address. ENS33 is the name of this interface, and you can see under INET gives you the 172.16.36.2 with a 24-bit mask. Let's see if we can ping. There we go. So let me cancel that. After I have established connectivity, so we can see I was able to successfully ping google.com, the first thing I will do is I will sudo yum update. So we trust you have received the usual lecture from the local system admin. It usually boils down to these three things: yes, yes, and yes. So we're going to put the password in for this user, and then we're going to let this scan for updates. Now, depending on when you download this, there might be a ton of updates, or there might just be a few like this, which is great because this will take seconds to download 90 megs. It tells you right the second line from below, and we'll let it go do its thing. You can see it's pretty quick, and that's essentially it. What I'll do after this finishes installing is I will reboot, and then from that point forward I will probably not log into this virtual machine from this session again, meaning I will not open this window and type here. I will use some kind of a command line utility SSH in my case, the secure shell, say that 3 times fast, and control it from my production desktop. And that's how I control servers across the internet, for my clients and everything else. And it just makes life very easy to do. Once this is done, like I said, we'll restart, and then that'll pretty much be it. Once this is done, copy the virtual machine someplace where you can write it to the cloud or duplicate it so you have it. Be careful with duplications because you need to regenerate your MAC address once you copy it back, or keep a note of what your MAC address is and then restore it if you need to for whatever reason. You don't want to have a conflict on your network. So once that's done, we'll do a reboot. So you can see right here what it upgraded, what it installed, latest kernel, looks good. We'll do a sudo reboot, and it takes seconds to reboot. That's essentially it, folks. Everything else should be pretty self-explanatory in some of the other videos that I've made, and that's it. We have just set up a working base server, meaning just system. From here, you can install additional packages. You can install, server software, if you want to do file servers or whatever, SMB, CIFS. There's so many options now. You can create, like I said earlier, DNS servers, DHCP servers, VPN appliances. I mean, it's all there. If you take the time to read the documentation at the beginning of this video where I went through the server installation roles, you can see what you can literally do with it. And you can always, go back and do it after the fact. If you mess up, go back to your base and start over. So that's why I say duplicate your virtual machines, because if you get to a point where you deploy a virtual machine that works, and then a week from today or whatever, you decide to go back, patch it, and that patching process breaks something, well, you're not going to be up the creek without the paddle, if you know what I mean, because you'll have a restore point that's relatively close to working as what you were a week prior. So when you created that duplicated image, you can also use snapshotting in VMware to create snapshots. I just do duplicates. So anyway, if you have any questions, reach out to us. Let us know what we can do for you, and good luck in your deployments, and thank you for watching.